about TransformTO and in particular about um, the next action plan that we're working on for 2026 to 2030. I do have some background information. I actually have a lot of slides, so I'm going to try and go through them fairly quickly, at least some of the ones at the beginning. I do have some background just in case people aren't sort of familiar about where we've come to get to where we are right now. So I'll try and go through them relatively quickly, and we can talk a little bit about the action plan development. Um, so, quick outline. What does climate change look like? I probably don't need to spend too much time on this because you all know this. So, where do our emissions come from? I'll just give you a quick overview on that. Currently, what's in the action plan? What are we doing on mitigation and resilience very quickly, and then we'll get into the development of the next 5-year plan, and we can have some time for questions. So it's a lot of slides. I'll probably skim through some of them fairly quickly so we can get to the stuff that you want to hear. What does climate change look like in Toronto? I don't think I probably need to tell any of you this, but these are some slides that we often use when we're speaking to the public. Climate change looks like increased and more intense rainfall and flooding. Climate change looks like more intense and longer heat waves. Climate change looks like smoke from wildfires. Climate change looks like food insecurity and many other things. We are starting to see the impacts of climate in the city. This is things that we hear when we speak to residents, and we all individually experience these things as well. So we're starting to feel these impacts, and TransformTO is the city's strategy to address climate in the city. We also do some resilience work as well, which I'll touch on as well. When we see those things happening in the city, flooding and heat waves, we do have some data to back this up as well. This is actually an old data set that shows trends from the early 2000s to what is projected out to 2040 and 2050. So daily temperature maximums increasing, number of hot days increasing, extended heat waves increasing, daily rainfall maximum increasing. But just last year in 2024, we did a new study in partnership with TRCA, the Toronto and Region Conservation Authority, and we actually have a new data set. I don't actually have a new slide like this updated yet, but we do have some new data that can be downloaded from our website or the TRCA website that tells you a little bit more about this in more detail and what the new data is telling us. I'm just trying to move some stuff around on my screen here so I can see everything. So, for example, the summer of 2024 was the hottest on record. The heat waves in Eastern Ontario were made much more likely by climate change. The wildfire season the previous summer was the most destructive on record. Um, and the region is experiencing or has experienced several major storms that exceeded the 1 in 100 year storm. So we know that these extreme weather events are increasing in severity and frequency. And if you're interested in looking at some of the data, you can find it on our website. But I put the TRCA link here because it's a little bit of a simpler URL. And I can share this after the session if you'd like to download the report and look at it. Uh, so how do residents feel about climate change? I mean, I'm sure everyone on here knows about this anyway, but I mean, our division does a study every few years called the Climate Perceptions and Attitudes Survey, where you survey the public. And this is actually not a targeted survey, but it's just meant to be a representative sample of Torontonians. We do it with a public research firm. So it's a proper survey. And what it tells us every time we do it is that people are concerned. Um, but the numbers that often jump out to us is that people don't know what they can do and they're not aware of what the city's doing. So that's work that our team is meant to be doing, right? Which is along with staff in our outreach and engagement unit, making sure people know the types of things that they can do and can learn more about TransformTO. So where do our emissions come from? So every year on an annual basis, we do a sector-based emissions inventory. This is focused on what are called Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. So emissions within the city, or emissions from electricity. We also do periodically a community-wide consumption-based emissions inventory. So that's not the focus of what I'm speaking about tonight, but just so you know, we have done one of those, and we're working on a second one. The first one was from 2019, and consumption-based emissions, of course, are like supply chain emissions, emissions that happen outside of the city but are due to activity within the city. And we also do an annual progress report on TransformTO. So, like I said, scope one emissions are direct, so that's vehicles and homes and businesses and factories and things like that. Scope two are indirect emissions from grid supplied energy. And scope three, which is not the focus of this work, is supply chain emissions. Um, so this from our most recent inventory in 2022, we know that 56% of our emissions come from buildings, 35% from transportation, and 9% from waste. The ratio of these emissions is it's pretty consistent. It doesn't change too much even as the emissions come down over time. And if we dig into it a bit more, within the building sector, a little over half come from residential buildings, about a third from commercial institutional, and 11% from industrial. Within the residential, it is a little bit more single-family homes versus multi-unit residential buildings. It's almost 50-50, but I think it's like 52% single-family homes, if I remember correctly. Um, and within transportation, just over a third of our emissions and 66% from passenger vehicles, and the remainder from commercial light or heavy vehicles. And finally, 9% of our emissions from waste, and it's almost all from methane from landfill. So based on those sources, the key drivers are obviously natural gas in buildings, gasoline in vehicles, along with methane and diesel, and some emissions from electricity. So just giving you a sense of where our emissions are coming from in case you're not familiar with the inventory. How is the city addressing climate change? So I'll talk a little bit about our current plan before we get into the development of the new plan. As you likely know, Canada is a signatory to the Paris Accord, um, but that's an international agreement, and of course, things happen at all levels of government, but a lot of the action in climate happens at the local level. Because we're talking about vehicles and cities and buildings and how cities are laid out. So basically, our work is in support of reaching the targets of the Paris Agreement. And so I'll tell you a bit about our targets that are within our strategy. So the city's strategy, as you probably know, is the net zero strategy. It was adopted in 2017, or sorry, it was adopted. The original version was adopted in 2017. But after City Council declared a climate emergency, we worked to recalibrate the strategy to a target of net zero emissions. And that was adopted by City Council in December of 2021. So we have a target of net zero emissions by 2040, which you're probably aware of, and an interim target of a 65% reduction in emissions by 2030. So that's our interim target, which is only 5 years from now. I won't explain this whole graph, but it just shows sort of what I was just saying, like the timeline of where we've come from the original TransformTO. A lot of work happening during the pandemic, so there was a lot going on. We were doing some technical modeling, which I'll talk a bit about. We've had 3 rounds and now actually 4 rounds of public and stakeholder engagement. We created our climate advisory group, which Lynn is a member of in 2022. So there's been quite a lot of engagement on developing the original strategy and then the net zero strategy and now the next 5-year action plan. So this graph tells you a little bit about sort of where we're at now compared to our baseline and where our targets are at. So our baseline in our greenhouse gas inventory is from 1990, and it was about 25 megatons, just under 25 megatons of emissions. We're currently at 15.5 megatons of CO2 equivalent from our most recent inventory in 2022. So that's a 36% decrease from our baseline. So, I mean, the graph shows that we're making progress, but there's a lot of progress still to be made to get to net zero by 2040. And if you look at the graph, it needs to get steeper. So, more progress more quickly. We did exceed our 2020 target, which was 25% reduction, but we are in danger of missing our interim targets, 2025 and 2030. And again, the 2030 target is a 65% reduction. That's a very significant amount of work between now and 2030, and that's what we'll be talking about for the development of the next action plan. And just a reminder, all of this work is happening in the context of a growing population and a growing economy. So these are absolute numbers, they're not per capita. So as the city grows, we still need to be reducing emissions. And if you look at these lines, essentially the one we're trying to reduce the emissions at the bottom, we're trying to decouple these lines essentially. So as the city grows and the economy grows, it's being electrified basically. So we're decoupling from emissions, which is the line at the bottom. Just a reminder of some of the guiding principles found in the strategy. These are all have very strong links to equity, advancing social equity, and creating good local jobs, improving public health, and contributing to poverty reduction. So there's meant to be co-benefits in the climate work that we're doing through the strategy. In other words, there are already a number of affordability issues in the city, and we are not only trying not to exacerbate those affordability issues, we're trying to help to solve them through climate action. So, for example, as you decrease energy use, you decrease the bills associated with energy use. Just a quick word on resilience and adaptation because it's quite important to the work that we do, and we're trying to create stronger links between resilience, adaptation, and the mitigation work that we do. We have another team within our unit, within our division that works on resilience, and they are picking up the resilience strategy, which was passed by City Council in 2019. And so the resilience work is meant to be happening sort of hand in hand with the mitigation work, and we are working hard to coordinate that work and look at co-benefits of the mitigation work that we do when it comes to resilience. This work has three focus areas, which is people and neighborhoods, infrastructure, and leading a resilient city. So there's a small team within our division doing this work. They're working on both adaptation, which is adapting to uh, or adjustments in systems in response to climate change, but also resilience, which is the capacity to be more ready and to anticipate and cope with shocks. So one is a bit more reactive and one is a bit more longer term. Important to note that climate change disproportionately affects vulnerable populations and exacerbates existing inequities. So when we do talk about climate with Torontonians, when we do outreach and when we do public consultation, we do hear a lot about resilience because this is how people are experiencing climate. So they're experiencing heat waves, there's a lack of green space, or they're experiencing food insecurity. Transit systems are vulnerable to shocks and resilience. So these are the day-to-day issues that people face through climate. And just as one example of how the city would be helping in this way, a climate adaptation action would be sort of planting more trees in an area with less tree canopy. But the resilience piece is empowering and mobilizing communities to support urban forestry. So it's a longer term solution to make communities more resilient to the shocks of climate. So back to the mitigation piece that our team works on. This is the path to net zero, and this is from our previous round of technical modeling. So we are actually doing currently a new round of modeling, and unfortunately, I can't share it with you at the moment because it's not completed yet and it's not published and not made public yet, but it will be made public probably sometime this year. It's probably going to tell a similar story to this previous round. So there you see sort of where we're at in the middle here at about 15.5 megatons, and there's our targets, our 2025, 30, and net zero by 2040 targets. Um, and it shows that um, from the first two scenarios, which is do nothing, where we don't actually do anything else on climate other than what's already been done. It's basically a pretty flat trajectory. And the business as planned scenario, which has things like transit improvements and expansion of EV charging and, some actions that the city is currently focused on, gets us down to about 10 megatons. But getting to net zero by 2040 or even by 2050 needs considerably more action. And that's what we're currently modeling. And so once we have some of those results, we'll be able to share them publicly later this year. Um, and so that gap between sort of business as planned and net zero by 2040 is the focus of the next action plan. Um, Critical steps to net zero. Um, Demonstrate carbon accountability, local and globally, by establishing a carbon budget. So that's something the city has done, and we've done our first annual carbon budget process. Now that's an internal thing for city operations, but eventually we hope to have like a community-wide carbon budget as well. Second, accelerate a rapid and significant reduction in fossil natural gas use in buildings. I'll talk a little bit about our key policy on that and how it's fitting into the action plan. Increase access to low carbon transportation and increase local renewable energy. So I realize we're running a little short on time, so I'll try and skip ahead here. These are the actions in the current plan, so I won't read them all. But basically, there's a number of things happening currently, trying to get buildings off of gas and to make them more energy efficient. The city is doing that both with city buildings, but also encouraging building owners throughout the community. The city is greening our fleet and TTC buses, but we're also promoting low carbon transportation in the community through EV charging, the cycling network plan, transit transit service improvements. There's a number of waste actions and a number of ways that we're engaging the community. So these are actions in the current action plan. Um, and this slide is just meant to show that there's a lot of co-benefits associated with climate action, but I don't think I really have time to read it. There's also, as I mentioned on that last yellow box on the slide, there's a lot of ongoing engagement through our outreach and engagement unit. Things like the neighborhood climate action champions and Live Green volunteers, where the city tries to engage with people on climate and environmental issues. So there's a number of programs ongoing, and this work again will be a focal point of the next action plan. So just a quick summary of what we heard in a recent consultation. Some of you might have participated in this and been aware of it, but from November to January, we went out to the public talking about the next action plan, how people are experiencing climate, and what they would like to see in the next plan. So you might recognize some of these materials that we used throughout the winter on this plan. And we're focused on a few key areas. Single family homes in particular, where people have control over the heating because we know we need to get those homes off of gas. Also low carbon transportation, but also for people who don't own their own home or don't own a car, the ability to use their voice or to advocate for climate, maybe with their building manager, building owner, their landlord, etc. So those are the sort of key focal areas of the consultation. We had about 2,800 participants through a number of means, a survey, group discussions, which some of you probably participated in, a couple of webinars, and 20 pop-up events across the city. And all of this stuff is found in our consultation report, so I don't know if I probably won't read these slides, but I will give you some highlights about what we heard in this session. We heard that people are interested in taking action. They're already feeling the impacts of climate, for example. So they're feeling health impacts, they're feeling financial impacts of climate. They're interested in taking action in their home or in the way they get around. They have completed energy audits, or they're interested in doing that. They've installed heat pumps. Um, they have reduced their vehicle use, or they plan to switch their combustion vehicle to a hybrid or electric vehicle. Now, this is not a scientific sample. These are just anyone who wanted to engage with us. So normally there's an overrepresentation of people who are interested in climate in in these consultations, but it is indicative of the things that people are interested in doing, but also some of the barriers they're facing. And the barriers included financial barriers, so affordability or lack of incentives from the city or other levels of government, no control over decision making, a lack of knowledge, access to information, lack of better options, for example, the ability to take convenient transit, or lack of available EV charging to switch to a low carbon vehicle. So a number of barriers identified by participants. Um, and a number of supports that people are interested in accessing. So we asked people about rebates and incentives, information, services, and almost 50% of respondents have accessed or are currently accessing or would like to access financial incentives. So we know that's a really key driver of getting people to take climate action, in particular due to affordability issues that people are currently experiencing. Most participants are feeling the impacts. There are actions that they are taking or are planning to take. The biggest barrier is the financial strain or the lack of control over decision making, need more citywide education at the neighborhood level, and need funding for programs and incentives, including funding from other levels of government. So there's some key barriers and key interests that people communicated in the public engagement program. So now the city is currently in the process of developing the next five-year action plan. We've been engaged with the Climate Advisory Group over the last couple of months on this as well, and engaged with staff in across the city and in a few divisions and agencies as well. So we're gathering input and analyzing input. We do feasibility testing. We do alignment with our corporate goals and the priorities of city council, and we look at strategies for advancing these climate actions. Just a quick note as well on this, um, the city is doing, I would say, a bit better on the where we have control. So if you look at these three circles, there's the lead by example, that's the corporate actions, city buildings, city fleet, etc. The compel, which is where we're trying to get action in the community, and advocate, where we're typically speaking to other levels of government or trying to get other organizations to do things. And in the blue circle, we are doing actually quite well because we have control over city buildings, so we can decarbonize them. We have control over our fleet. We're greening the TTC bus fleet. So there's more progress being made where we have more direct control. Where we don't have as much control, it's more of a challenge, and that's a big nut to crack in this next action plan. So that's how do we compel people? How do we incentivize people? How do we inform people to take action on climate? Um, the red circle makes up about 95% of emissions in the community. So the city emissions in blue, only about 5%. There's another number of feasibility lenses we need to work through as we create actions for the plan. I won't read all these, but essentially, we want to have a plan that's doable, and we want to have a plan that's feasible. And we need to filter all the actions through these lenses to make sure that what we're going to bring forward to committee and council will be accepted and approved, but also hopefully reach that level of ambition we need to reach to get to net zero by 2040. Quick look at our timelines. So we've been undertaking a technical modeling process, which I mentioned over the last almost year or so. Those results are coming to us now, but again, they're not public yet, so I can't share them. And our climate advisory group has been assisting us. We did the public consultation process, and we have ongoing engagement across the city. So we'll be developing the action plan this spring. It's not clear to us yet when it's actually going to committee and council. I know that would probably be of interest to you. It was meant to be going in June. It may be going in the fall. So as soon as I know that, I'll let you know. We don't have um, a final decision on that yet. It may still be going in June, but if not, it would likely be going probably in September. So that's where we're at with the process. So that is a very, sorry, I did a lot of talking, but a very quick overview of where we come from and where we're going in the plan. I hope that made some sense and is, good food for thought or food for discussion. Happy to take any questions, if anyone has any.
Okay, thank you so much, Andrew. You covered so much. We have recorded it, so people will be able to listen again. And if you could put a link to the report that you were speaking from in the chat, that would probably be good. We also will have a resource document that should have a number of the links that people would be interested in seeing. But for right now, we'll just take a few questions. What I'm seeing a few comments and questions from Vince, and this one concern is messaging. Like, how do we express that the term net zero by such and such a time means something to us, climate advocates, but it doesn't mean a lot to the public. So the question of how do we communicate is one. Do you want to address that one?
Yeah, sure. I know it's a really interesting question and really important, I think, because we get this advice from the Climate Advisory Group, where we have a working group on communications and engagement. We get a number of pieces of advice from them, and one of them is that there's really no one size fits all for communicating this, right? Because people have different experiences, whether or not they're experiencing climate for starters, or whether or not they're interested in reducing their emissions, and whether or not they own a home or they're already, they already might have a small carbon footprint or a relatively smaller one. So there's really no sort of one size fits all, but I agree that talking about net zero by 2040, I mean, yeah, I don't think that's really resonates with a lot of people. The advice we get from our advisory group is to meet people where they're at, like more of a values-based approach. How are people experiencing climate, for example, and how can the city help? What are they interested in? Are they interested in reducing their emissions? And if so, what barriers are they facing? So the way we're approaching it now is that there may be some big messaging that goes citywide on climate that's really just communications purposes, but we really need to engage with people in ways that work for them as much as possible, which is quite challenging in a big city. So this is more like at the neighborhood level, working through existing groups. And so the action plan, when it does come out, will likely speak to this, which is the ways the city can engage in different ways in different neighborhoods. So communicating very broadly, but then also reaching people as much as possible on an individual level.
Thank you, Andrew. And I want to draw attention to the fact that within the Climate Advisory Group, there are working groups, and one of them is on Communication and Engagement Working Group. And that it's possible to have input on that particular approach because we know that a lot has to happen there. Okay, a number of other questions. We've got one about supporting natural solutions to store carbon and mitigate extreme weather. You want to say a word about that?
Yeah, I probably can't say too much about that because it's very important work. It's work that our resilience team is doing, and so we're trying to work in tandem with them as much as possible, such that when there's resilience work happening, it supports mitigation work, and vice versa. So we know that when it comes to the impacts of weather, the ability to manage larger volumes of water is really important. So that also speaks to tree canopy and green space and natural solutions and not just engineering solutions. And those solutions have a lot of co-benefits as well. So when you increase the tree canopy or you increase green space, it's better for the residents. So I can't speak unfortunately, directly to like the work that's ongoing. I mean, I can speak a little bit to it, but our resilience team is currently doing a couple of assessments. One is a neighborhood climate level vulnerability assessment, where they look at neighborhoods across the city and assess the big climate threats that they're facing, and then use that input to inform the next resilience strategy. And there's a number of other pieces of work that they're doing in tandem with that. Um, that report will be going to committee and council later in the year, so it's not timed with this one, but we do acknowledge that the work needs to be um, coordinated, right? I mean, residents don't really care if this like if this work is separate, like it needs to be happening together. A lot of people wouldn't make the distinction between mitigation and resilience, so we know that we need to be doing it at the same time. So yeah, I guess the short answer is all of the actions within the mitigation plan will also be assessed for resilience co-benefits and vice versa.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. We need to keep these brief, but I think we'll take just a couple more and then we go on to Howson's presentation. But we'll keep track of all the questions and we'll follow up. So there's a question about the lack of qualified contractors as the barrier to get work done in residential buildings. Are the unions getting onto this, as well as policy to create good training and apprenticeships?
Yeah, that another really good question. Yes, that is a significant challenge, and the city is trying to tackle that in a couple of different ways. We're working with our Economic Development and Culture Division on some strategies for both supply chain and also labor force projections. So trying to get a labor force trained for the green economy. And so there's definitely shortages for key skills, like for example, heat pumps or different types of net zero building advisors, for example. Um, and the city has also been partnering with some of the local higher education institutions, so the colleges in particular, and also the universities on training for green jobs. And I know there's also some other organizations working on this as well. So there's things happening. Like it's not something I work on directly, but I know it's a key challenge because when you're talking about scaling up in the way that we're talking about, supply chain and labor force are potentially could be key barriers, and we don't want them to be. We don't want to. We already have enough barriers that we want to be making sure that we have the supplies and the people power that we need to take these actions. So the city's working on it through EDC and through the HEI sector, but there's still a lot of work to do on that for sure.
Yep. Okay, so two more questions really. I'm going to be as quick as I can here, but one is about tracking upfront carbon specifically in new buildings and renovations to be part of the carbon budget. A lot of towers are going up, which are constructed with high carbon materials. Also, demolitions. How will the new plan deal with this?
Right. I'm not sure how to answer that, unfortunately, like it should. We are working on, you saw our first consumption-based inventory from 2019. We've been working with the University of Toronto on better understanding Scope 3 emissions in the construction industry, in particular in linear infrastructure, so buildings and roads and transit, et cetera. But it's still a work in progress. It's not really well advanced, unfortunately, at this time. The other thing we were trying to understand is the impact of improved circularity on the construction industry. So we're doing a separate study with U of T on that to understand like how we could better reuse materials, for example, from demolition. So it is on the radar. I'm not sure how much it's going to be in this iteration of the plan, but it's I mean, because essentially we're still at the study level for those things. But that is work that definitely needs to progress because Scope 3 emissions are actually quite important, and the supply chain emissions, in particular things like concrete, can be very carbon intensive. So it's something we're looking at. I can't really answer definitively how big of a part of the new plan it will be at this point.
Thank you. And this will be the last question. Even then, we'll keep track of the others in the chat, the comments that are there. But this one is about plant-based foods and reduced food waste. So, would it be possible to have more education for the public on the benefits of plant-based foods for their health and the benefits for the environment?
Yeah, I think that's another great idea and something that we don't focus on a lot. So you didn't see it in my presentation, but I do agree with you. It's very important. We got a presentation in our division recently on the impacts of different types of agriculture on emissions, in particular, like uh, you know, vegan vegetarian diet versus like a more meat-based diet, and it's quite significant. So I do think that that needs to be part of the work that we do, and that would be happening through our outreach and engagement unit on lower carbon, lower carbon food choices. The city is part of the Cool Food Pledge that some of you might be aware of, where, and I don't know too much about it, but it basically relates to reducing the carbon footprint of the food that the city purchases through our procurement. So we are trying to lead by example, but I do agree that I think it's an important part of just getting information in people's hands, right? We're not telling them what to eat necessarily, but we want to tell them what the impacts are of the things that they eat so they can make an informed decision. So I think maybe doing some partnerships with other organizations that are working on those things would be really useful. And that would be something that would be happening through our outreach and engagement unit and possibly some other divisions of the city like Toronto Public Health um, or procurement division.
Okay, so we're going to wrap it up right now. I'm just going to make one little comment as we wrap it up, and with great appreciation, Andrew, for you coming and sharing with us. So one comment there was that we need to share case studies, successes. People need to know about successes and progress. And then there's also a comment about neighborhood level engagement, especially in underserved communities, as per the equity related guiding principles, partnership with agencies. And I know from the CAG that we're looking at partnership with local agencies, so I can say that that work is happening. But those are some of the those are some of the comments that are here. And we'll save the chat and we can pass along any additional comments and links that people might have shared here. But thank you very much, and thank you everyone for the questions and comments. There's a lot there. Some of them may be also relevant for House Sen, and we'll